Kada ljubav majku vodi, ona svetu dete rodi, al udari sudba kleta, osta majka bez deteta. Ona njega sada traži i ne sluša više laži, uradit će sve što treba da se nađe njena beba. Život sada borba posta, pronaći će majka čedo, prevrnut će zemlju nebo, ukrasti ga nisi trebo. Nemoj Bože nikom dati da doživi takve boli, kako mogu tuđe krasti kad se dete svoje voli. Još jedno dete je otišlo. Još jedno dete je nestalo. Da li voliš majku drugu, mila kćeri, dragi sine? Ovo posta borba prava, za tebe se rado gine. Svuda tebe tražim sada, odustati nikad neću, pronaći ću svoju bebu, svoje dete, svoju sreću. Vreme više problem nije, majke zato bitku biju, koje njima decu kravo, s kim se kači nije znao. Nemoj Bože nikom dati da doživi takve boli, kako mogu tuđe krasti kad se dete svoje voli. Još jedno dete je nađeno. Nađeno i vraćeno.
Dragi prijatelji, poštovane majke i očevi, uvaženi gosti iz cijelog svijeta, kolege istraživači, profesori, akademici, aktivisti. Čast mi je, ali i neizmjerna ljudska odgovornost što vas mogu pozdraviti na prvom međunarodnom kongresu zajedno u zaštiti dece u ime organizatora kongresa i u svoje lično ime. Danas nismo ovdje da bismo razmijenili bolna iskustva. Ovdje smo da ispišemo istoriju koja je predugo bila brisana, spaljivana i skrivana u mračnim arhivama bolnica, tajnih službi i administracija. Kada govorimo o nestalim bebama, mnogi će reći da je to tragičan propust ili incident. Mi smo ovdje da kažemo istinu. Ovo je sistemski zločin koji ima svoje duboke, mračne korijene u istoriji ljudske civilizacije, jer zlo ne postoji od juče, ono je starije od čovjeka ili barem koliko i čovjek. Kroz vijekove ljudska rasa se borila protiv najstrašnijih oblika poniženja. Sjetimo se vremena robovlasništva, kada je ljudsko biće bilo tretirano kao roba, kao predmet bez prava na ime i porodicu. Sjećamo se trgovine robljem koja je kidala djecu iz naručja majki da bi ta djeca postajala tuđe vlasništvo. Civilizacija se tada zavjetovala i rekla nikad više. Ipak, danas u 21. vijeku, vijeku vještačke inteligencije i navodnih vrhunskih ljudskih prava, mi se suočavamo sa istom tom zvijeri, samo u novom odijelu. Krađa identiteta i prodaja tek rođene djece u porodilištima širom svijeta nije ništa drugo nego savremeno robovlasništvo. To je zločin protiv čovječnosti koji ne zastarijeva, jer bol majke kojoj je ukradeno dijete nema rok trajanja. Otete bebe su višestruke žrtve. Oduzeto im je pravo na istinu, pravo na potpunu i bezuslovnu ljubav njihovih roditelja, pravo na dom i na domovinu. Ta djeca danas žive nepotpunim životom, kao i njihovi roditelji iz čijeg su zagrljaja oteti. U srpskom jeziku, kada žena ostane bez muža, zovu je udovica. muškarca udovac. Za majku koja ostane bez djeteta ne postoji opisni termin. Valjda niko nije mogao da smisli izraz koji bi to stanje opisao u jednoj riječi. Riječ koja bi mogla da opiše takvu bol. Pretpostavljam da je tako i u drugim jezicima, o tome valja razmisliti. Dosadašnji napori naših udruženja na Balkanu, a i šire, bili su herojski, ali često usamljeni i nemoćni pred zidom državnih institucija. Zato je ovaj kongres prekretnica. Danas pokrećemo inicijativu za formiranje međunarodne organizacije za pronalazak nestale i otete djece iz porodilišta Pronađi. Find. Zašto find? Riječ pronađi neki od nas su čuli od svojih roditelja koji više, nažalost, nisu među živima. Zato smo nastavili da tragamo za svojom braćom i sestrama. Zašto find? Zato što nam treba nadnacionalni mehanizam. Treba nam snaga koja ne poznaje granice, jer ni trgovina djecom ne poznaje granice. Treba nam organizacija koja će u Briselu, Strasburu, pred Ujedinjenim nacijama govoriti jednim moćnim glasom. Zato ćemo danas usvojiti rezoluciju o zaštiti dece. To nije samo papir, to je naš ustav. Tom rezolucijom zahtijevamo bezuslovno otvaranje arhiva, formiranje nezavisne međunarodne DNK baze, krivičnu odgovornost za sve koji su učestvovali u organizovanom lancu krađe ili, bolje rečeno, otmice djece, bez obzira na to koliko su visoko u hijerarhiji moći. Dragi prijatelji, pred nama je dug dan, od naučnih analiza do potresnih svjedočanstava majki čija djeca su oteta i proglašena mrtvom. Svaka riječ izgovorena danas je cigla u temelju organizacije FIND. Vode nas dva sveta cilja, da pronađemo otetu djecu i da spriječimo otmice u budućnosti. Danas prestajemo biti žrtve koje samo mole. Danas postajemo istraživači, tužioci i sudije u ime istine. Naša djeca, gdje god da su, zaslužuju da znaju ko su. Mi smo dužni da im to omogućimo. Proglašavam Prvi međunarodni kongres zajedno u zaštiti dece otvoreni. Hvala vam.
Ja ću moj govor izneti malo kasnije, zato što ću verovatno biti jedna od najdosadnijih osoba koja će se danas javljati, pa ću stoga zamoliti Bojana da se on javi pa da idemo dalje, da ne bi ja uzimala baš previše vremena jer imamo mnogo šta čuti od nekih drugih ljudi koji su ovde danas prvi put.
I nažalost u toj službi sam video stvari koje se kosi sa svim zakonima, ne samo sa crkvenim nego i sa državnim, kao što je organizovana pedofilija, zlostavljanje dece, trgovina decom, ubistva i još mnoge druge stvari. Te se stvari nisu kosile samo sa svešteničkom službom, nego i sa mojim ličnim životnim stavovima i svoju svešteničku službu ja sam zamenio međunarodnim aktivizmom i jako mi je drago što sam imao priliku i što sad imam priliku da obavestim ceo svet o stvarima koje se dešavaju pred našim očinama. U svakom trenutku, znači, sistem dozvoljava tako neke stvari da se dešavaju potpuno nekažnjeno. Ja sam pripremio ovdje jedan govor koji će ući, da kažem, u taj naš završni ekspoze, ali uvek kada dobijem priliku da se izrazim, ja uvek nešto tako kažem iz glave, tako izvinite ako bude nekih misli malo nepovezanih, ja naprosto me ove stvari lično pogađaju. Ja sam, kažem, i svedok svih tih stvari koje se dešavaju u tim ustanovama i dosta sam upoznat kroz rad gospođe Ane Pejić i svih drugih aktivista o temi nestalih beba. Naš zadatak, kao što rekao gospodin, nije da budemo ponovo žrtve, nego da udružimo naše snage i da pokušamo da promenimo stvari koliko je do nas, da otvorimo vrata te istine koja kogod da je bolna, ona se u jednom trenutku mora rešiti. To su stvari koje ne mogu da stoje u zatvornim arhivima i da se to samo tako gleda. Puno vam hvala. Ja vam se obraćam u ime organizacije Savez kršćana Hrvatske i svih drugih gostiju i nadam se da ćemo kroz razmenjivanje misli doći do krajnjeg cilja. Hvala još jedanput.
Ja sam novinarka, snimila sam jedan dokumentarni film, sada sa mojim kolegom Denisom Karemom u bosansko-engleskoj koprodukciji Prvi snimamo drugi dokumentarni film. Koristit ćemo materijale koje ja imam od ranije, samo Đadire, koje nismo koristili, a to su priče roditelja sa područja bivše Jugoslavije.
The doctor who illegally sold many of the babies he delivered.
It's a small town. You would have never thought that something this big would have been going on. He requested $1,000.
They were told to come to the back door, and they handed the baby out and said, good luck.
Inez Madrigal has travelled to Madrid hoping to find out the truth. As a baby, she was gifted to a woman who hadn't given birth to her.
Since a Missouri woman's reunion with the daughter she thought died at birth, more than 100 women have come forward suspecting a hospital stole their newborn.
In raising this issue in the academic field in a way which starts to make discussing stolen babies and adoption fraud a legitimate issue of academic focus. The research that we've done over the last 2 years was really started by consciousness of the Bebe affair in Serbia, associated with Zorica Jovanovic. And this gave us the realization that there was an area of criminological behaviour that was not being addressed by academia or faculty, and in many cases was being deliberately marginalised or cast as the type of thing that one was not meant to be recognising or talking about. Through a fortuitous link to Anna, we were able to agree an arrangement where very kindly, very many families went through the often difficult process of reliving their experiences and talking to essentially a group of unconnected academics and laying bare many facts in circumstances where we are profoundly thankful for the trust that they have placed in us and that we hope to return to them through the work that we do in the academic field. The research team included myself. I'm a senior lecturer in criminology at a British university, Bath Spa. Sandy Dizdarovic, who many of you will already know, was involved in the research from the outset. Alexander Carswell, whose credentials are here, but he acted as an additional researcher, and Eliza Bachman as well, who is here. And as I go through the presentation, I will talk about the overall dynamics of stolen babies in Serbia that we have witnessed. Alexander will talk about some of the legal implications of the evidence that we have seen, and Eliza will give a short few thoughts on the other broader implications of where this research takes us. But I would emphasise this is one small part of a very much larger and wider dynamic. And we're very conscious of that because of the discussions that we have had with all of you, even just in the last few hours. Next slide, please. So you'll all be familiar with the Centre za Otete Bebe. This was where the research originally took place. Next slide, please. Oh, sljedeći, molim. Well, and I am inclined to think of this research as rather like the murals that have been painted on the streets of Ruma by the personnel of the centre. For a long time, it has not been possible to recognise this type of criminality in academic circles. And in the same way that the centre took their message out onto the street, raising awareness in Roma and making people who had not previously thought about this problem aware of it, the article and the academic work that we are doing, we hope, is a bit like a mural in that field. What it will do is make people who were unaware or in denial of this problem in a position where they must face it because there is credible academic evidence that it is happening, it is real, and it is widespread. Next slide, please. So the aims of the research were to look at child abduction from maternity and neonatal facilities because we had identified that this was very poorly represented in things like policy documents and guidance. Very rarely did you see anything, if ever, in missing persons policies that articulated that a person could go missing from a trusted institution under the care of professionals which they had a right to expect would behave with integrity towards them. We were aware also that in academia, in many cases, adoption fraud was legitimised. The academic literature said, as long as the child goes to a, inverted commas, better place, then this is not exploitation and not abuse. And we found that to be a problematic and ethically difficult position for academia to hold on this issue. And so what we had to do was to try to get an idea of a complex dynamic, something that was often so difficult for people to understand that there wasn't a word or phrase that represented it. And to present that in an academic way where academic and policy communities would recognise this as a coherent dynamic of criminality that could be referred to and further researched. Next slide, please. Yeah. I won't talk too much about the methodology, except to say that this was a piece of research which was conducted on the basis of interviews. We call it qualitative research in academia, but fundamentally it involves people. And this is a story of people. And it's a story of people who have shown quite extraordinary courage and fortitude across many years. And the simple act of talking to people like me and the research team was another sacrifice that has been made by these families on top of the sacrifice that they have been asked to go through across many years and many decades. And for that, we are profoundly grateful. Next slide, please. Many of you will be familiar, but the research was conducted in Roma in March of 2024. And we conducted 31 interviews with family members and examined 30 separate cases of child abduction taking place between the 1970s and 2018. We also examined what is the tip of the iceberg of documentation associated with those cases. We probably looked at a number of hundreds of documents which are valuable academically as they allow us to verify the interview data, but this is a small element of the amount of documentary evidence that exists in this organisation and across organisations in many countries and many jurisdictions. And tying together that broader sphere of data I think is one of the issues that we can perhaps move forward on in this Congress today, because this is not a phenomenon that lacks an evidential base. The evidence is there, it has simply not been tied together or been permitted to be used to ensure that justice is achieved for families whose children have been stolen. Next slide, please. So, the concept that we have developed from the research is what we call EPDIA, or PEDIA. And that is early post-delivery institutional abduction. And we define that academically as the abduction of a newborn infant where they have not been released alive or dead into the custody of their birth parent or legitimate legal guardian from maternity or hospital care. And the focus of that model, not exclusively, we have aligned with medical standards to look at the theft of children from hospitals and neonatal facilities from the first minutes of birth to approximately 28 days following birth, which is the medically defined neonatal period. That said, there are cases that we have looked at that go beyond this period, and we have kept those in the research, and it is significant that this is just one small dynamic. There are many other ways that children go missing at different times after birth, and which are processed into adoption or other forms of exploitation through different means. So we're aware this is only one small part of the picture. Next slide, please. The model then that we propose is one that includes a number of stages or phases. These are not discrete. They are not completely separate from each other, and often different phases will carry over and blend in the process of coordination as the child is identified and removed from their parent. But these were the phases that we saw evidenced in all of the interviews that we did with families. And this aligns with a form of criminological theory called crime scripting. The first phase is the selection of a suitable family with a suitable child for that child to be removed and passed into the illicit market for adoption or other purposes. And here we cannot know the mind of the perpetrators because we were interviewing victims, but we can make some interpretations of the type of things that perpetrators were looking for when they selected a family and targeted them for their child to be stolen. And among those factors, we see predominantly young mothers, often very unfamiliar with the birthing process or the process of hospital administration surrounding maternity and birth. We also see people who, in relative terms, are disempowered. They are disempowered because of their social or economic status, not in all cases, but in many cases. But crucially, they are disempowered because they do not have the ability to challenge the status of a trusted profession like that of medicine or authorities like those who might be involved in the creation of identities, and do that with sufficient social capital to mean that they are able to hold those authorities to account and make them transparent for their actions. We then see a fairly complex area of preparation or pre-activity. And this is where medical and administrative staff would cooperate together, often to provide a pretext medical condition, a false medical condition that they propose the child is suffering from, but for which we find either no evidence or very contradictory evidence when we go through documentation. We see the dynamics of unusual staffing, people turning up in hospitals who we cannot see have a right to be there and who do not fit into the normal structure of maternity care. We see an unusual pattern of preterm induction. So children who are the subject of either chemically, medically induced induction, or sometimes an induction which takes place under the guise of a manual cervical examination. We see the isolation both of the mother from the child, sometimes in the same facility, and sometimes with the child being moved to other, inverted commas, specialist facilities. And we also see the isolation of the mother from other birthing mothers, so that experiences can't be compared and anomalies in the way they're treated cannot be identified. And we see this accompanied by behaviours which are coercive, psychologically coercive, deceptive, where untruths are told to the parents about their own condition and that of their child. And we see what we call neutralisation techniques. And this is where a reassuring narrative may be provided to a parent, saying, don't worry, you're young, you will be able to have other children. And that is designed to limit the potential for that parent to require or request accountability from the medical authorities. This builds up to what we call the separation phase. It may be the case that the child and the mother have already been physically separated. The child has been taken to a different facility or a different ward. But the act of legal separation takes place when the presentation of the fraudulent death notice, a death notice for a child that is still alive, is presented to the parents. And this is the point at which the criminal threshold for abduction takes place. The evidence of the desire by the perpetrator to permanently deprive the parents of the child. In these circumstances, the necessary procedures that would allow the parents to see or to receive the body of their ostensibly dead child do not take place. Parents are prevented from seeing any evidence of the child's demise. What happens concurrently or thereafter is a complex process which is in many ways a bit like money laundering, but is essentially the laundering of the identity and existence of the child. And we break it down into three phases. One is the existential fraud, a fraud which says that a live child is actually dead when they are not. The second element is what we call identity laundering, where there is the creation of a new child identity with alternate parents. And the third element we call interment fraud. And this is where the authorities have proposed that a child has died and need to create false evidence of a burial that in fact has not taken place. And through that process, the child's identity is transferred to different parents, and a series of fraudulent evidence is created that makes investigation and accountability difficult. Finally, we see the stage of suppression. And suppression is what families will describe as the long war. the attrition of going up day to day against authorities who are taking every action that they can to make investigation difficult or impossible. This includes the obstruction of evidence, telling people that documents no longer exist or have been lost in floods, or passing them between departments so that it is impossible to identify where those documents are. It includes diversion, so trying to get people to commit to different processes, in particular the process of compensation, that will mean they surrender their ability to continue investigating their child's disappearance. It involves delegitimization, and that is presenting the concerns of parents as something which has emerged from irrational grief, or even couching this as conspiracy theorizing. And I think one of the important factors of this conference is that we are now seeing that the idea that this is a conspiracy is frankly falling apart. And through that, a long campaign of attrition is waged by the state and criminal actors on the parents, which forms a very severe form of additional victimization of those groups who have already experienced the tragic loss of their own children. And this is the Epedia model that we have developed on the basis of research. Next slide, please. We consider this to be an organised state crime. It is impossible to put this model in place without actions across institutions and by many actors in respected professions that should hold a position of trust. And so those assemblages cannot be something which is discrete or something which is just a group of rogue, bad actors in an institution. And so criminologically, we identify this as an illicit market which is characterized by both elite participation and state criminal symbiosis, the merging of state and criminal entities to achieve an illicit aim for profit. Next slide, please. What we propose then from this model is that this forms a dynamic of structured human trafficking. And we have developed the intersection of the Epedia model with the transnational legislation of human trafficking. This is one area of law in which we collectively may be able to exercise pressure for there to be compliance. And Alexander Carswell, who has worked for a significant amount of time in consultancy in this field in the United Kingdom and abroad, will now take you through how the Epedia model translates into the requirements of international human trafficking legislation.
What we found in our research is that there's multiple types of criminality occurring here. And so the most obvious is, of course, the abduction of the child. Our research doesn't in any way detract from that. That is a crime which has occurred against the whole family, the child, the mother, and of course the father also. But what we identified was that in addition to that abduction, we can also clearly see that the Epedia process constitutes human trafficking. Now, the international definition of human trafficking was provided in 2000 by a UN instrument called the Palermo Protocol, and that's been signed by almost every country in the world. So that means it's a global definition, so we have one concept that we're working off internationally. And it's also important to note at the outset that there is some movement in this direction already in the legislative sphere. So, for example, the EU, which took the Palermo Protocol definition of trafficking as its own, decided in 2024 to update their own definition to include specifically the words illegal adoption in the definition. This doesn't change anything materially, but what it does is indicate that there is growing awareness that illegal adoption is an avenue of exploitation, and that is good for what we're trying to achieve. Next slide, please. So this is a simplified diagram of the Palermo Protocol. It's quite wordy, but this helps you understand it a bit more easily. It's composed of three key elements. You have the act, the means, and the purpose. Very simply, what is done, how it is done, and why it is done. Now, in order for human trafficking to be recognised in the case of an adult, you need one example from each of these boxes to be present. You do not need every single example. You need one example from each. If any of the means in the middle have been used, then whatever has occurred, whatever consent may have been given by the adult, is not legal. Because if you have been made to do something due to deception, coercion, or the abuse of your position of vulnerability, it is not your fault. And in every case that we examined with our Apedia research, we found that the adults, we could clearly see that they constituted victims of human trafficking, that this process had occurred. In cases of children, this central element, the means section, is not required. And that's because a child cannot consent to their own exploitation under any circumstances, irrespective of how it's secured. What this means is that we've been able to demonstrate quite clearly we hope in our research paper, that both the mothers and children are victims of human trafficking. Next slide, please. Now, some of you may perhaps be very familiar with human trafficking, and some of you may even understand that this is almost fairly obvious that what we're saying is that this is human trafficking. However, the aim of the research paper, one of the key aims, was to be able to scientifically demonstrate this in a manner which could be accepted by academia, and therefore we can go forward with it as an accepted fact that what we are witnessing in the Apedia structure is a form of human trafficking. This has implications for where we go from here. Because, as I mentioned earlier, the Palermo Protocol is an international definition, there are both national laws which have been informed by it, but also international laws. For example, the Council of Europe's European Convention Against Trafficking, known as ECAT, its Article 27 says that where trafficking has occurred, either wholly or in part, on that state's territory, they must investigate it. We also have similar findings with the Article 4 of the European Convention on Human Rights. Article 4 prohibits human trafficking. And there's recent case law at the European Court of Human Rights, which has reiterated that the investigation should be the responsibility of the state. The victim is not expected to have to investigate. The state should investigate. That's their job. That's what they're best placed to do. What this means for us is that we have a mechanism that we can go to states, we can go to courts, we can go to international organisations. And if our Apedia research is accepted, then we can clearly demonstrate that we are dealing with human trafficking in addition to the abduction which we all understand to be present. Therefore, states have a strong obligation, a legal duty to investigate this. And this won't solve all of our problems. It won't solve anything overnight. But what it does is gives us another tool to work with, another avenue we can pursue, and which we intend to to hopefully bring about justice for all of you who are here today. Next slide, please. I'm now going to hand over to Eliza, and she's going to speak a bit more about thoughts.
This is not limited to Serbia, not limited to the Serbian medical sector, as it cannot take place in isolation, so it has more broader and international implications. Then there is also the question about the demand side, which cannot be missed. There is these people seeking out these children, and the question is who and how. So these are definitely two areas that need more research and action. And then there is also a need for more security in adoption processes. And I guess the question remains why the governance around the adoption of children is weaker than, for example, the governance surrounding the sourcing of, for example, coffee and chocolate. And there is also a need for more transparency and awareness raising, and to explore the possibilities how this can be achieved. So, for example, this could look like establishing a hotline where mothers that go into maternity can call and seek advice regarding this issue. And these are just some thoughts that we would like to also discuss with all of you throughout the day. And there's also to say that the latest case that we investigated for this research was in 2018. So if any of you have some evidence of cases later than that, we'd be very interested to talk to you about this. Thank you. Paul.
That's an overview of the research that we have conducted. The proposal is, in fact, the practice is that we have a submitted article with a high-profile criminological journal in the United Kingdom. We are hopeful that they will accept the article for publication, but if they don't, we will keep going until this is published. And when published and peer-reviewed, that will establish Wikipedia in the academic sphere with an evidential base that can no longer be denied and which we can use to take across to the policy sphere and just in the sphere of awareness raising, so that our mural together is the biggest and brightest that it possibly can be.
Kada osjetim situaciju da je ona najpogodnija, da nešto kažem. Neću ulaziti u rezultate istraživanja koje su moji prethodnici, uvaženi profesor Paul, Aleksis i Eliza iznijeli, ali ono što hoću zapravo ukazati i dovesti u vezu sa svim onim čime se vi bavite, jesu stadijumi učinjenja krivičnog djela koje smo spoznali kroz istraživanja koje je profesor Paul već nametnuo. Većini vas je možda nepoznata, dio vas je poznato, stadijumi učinjenja krivičnog djela u kriminalističkom smislu su podijeljeni u 3 faze. Prva faza jeste antidelictum, druga jeste tempore delictum i treća post delictum. Provodeći istraživanje, provodeći kvalitativne intervjue sa članovima porodica, sve ove faze su zaista spoznate kroz određene taktike i tehnike koje je sistem poduzimao. Recimo u prvoj fazi, odnosno antidelictum fazi, imamo nešto što se zove ideja i nešto što se zove odluka o realizaciji te ideje. Imamo nešto što se zove tipovanje mladih majki koji su u periodu trudnoće već tipovane i označene kao potencijalne vulnerabilne za krađu djeteta. Imamo u ovoj fazi još jednu podfazu koja se zove praćenje kroz trudnoću. Sljedeća faza jeste faza napada, odnosno tempore delictum faza, u okviru kojeg imamo napad koji se odvija tokom porođaja i ovdje se očituje nekoliko vrlo bitnih psiholoških karakteristika. Prva jeste psihološke prevare koje se odvijaju na način da ono što smo ustanovili nije bilo kontakta nakon poroda između novorođenčeta i majke, što zapravo stvara jednu biološku distinkciju, odnosno odvajanje djeteta od majke. Naravno, on ulazi u psihološku sferu na način, kao što je to profesor Paul kazao, pod izgovorom nemojte se sekirati, bit će dobro, imat ćete još djece. Drugi psihološki moment jeste psihološke obmane koje se odvijaju kroz istovremeno drugi dio, dakle, tempore delictum, a to je krivotvorenje dokumentacije, odnosno krivotvorenje dijela dokumentacije kroz obdukcione nalaze, kroz potvrde o smrti, kroz podatke iz od matičnih knjiga rođenih do matičnih knjiga umrlih. Nakon toga ulazimo u stanje legalnih tokova, i to je profesor Paul kazao vrlo jasno kao je Alexis i Eliza, i zapravo tih faza zapravo ulazimo u inkriminaciju krivičnog djela, odnosno stanje kriminaliteta. Kad kažem stanje legalizacije toka kroz usvajanje jeste nastavak sistema gdje nastoji ono što se, recimo, da vam napravim paralelu, u pranju novca zove stavljanje u legalni, prljavi novac u legalne tokove. Tako ovdje imamo dijete koje je rođeno, kome je izmijenjen identitet i stavljanje u legalne tokove starateljskih porodica. Treća faza, odnosno treći stadijum izvršenja krivičnog djela jeste post delictum. On se odlikuje život u zabludi od strane supočinitelja, to su papirnatih roditelja, kako ste ih vi nazvali, koji žive u zabludi sa djetetom u čijem kriminalitetu i uništavanju njegove životne sudbine su direktno učestvovali. Sljedeća faza jeste zapravo nešto što se zovu faza pritisaka na sve vas koji ste odlučili da se borite i tragate za istinom. I ono što je slično fazi bilo kojeg ratnog zločina, bilo kojeg kriminaliteta, jeste faza potpune negacije. E sad, zašto sam izmijenio i napravio zapravo ovakav uvod, jeste da vi kao majke, kao roditelji, ste prvo kroz neformalni sistem individua, a potom kroz svojevrsno jedan formalni, nevladini sistem se organizovali i zapravo otpočeli potpunu deblokadu svih tih podsistema koji su napravili ovo stanje kriminaliteta polazeći od 1943. godine do danas. Mi danas živimo zapravo posljedice i tragamo sa posljedicama, ne bavimo se zapravo otkrivanjem kriminaliteta. Na koji način je sistem odreagovao? Pa vrlo jednostavno. Donio je takve zakone. Ja sam, analizirajući taj zakon koji je donijet u Srbiji od momenta kad je donešen, napravio potpunu analizu i utvrdio zapravo da nikada s tim zakonom nećete ili nećemo dobiti bilo kakav pomak ili bilo šta pozitivno. Zašto? Zato što je zakon napravljen samo sa dva osnovna razloga. Prvi, da osnuje i obrazuje komisiju koja bi navodno prikupljala dokumentaciju koju vi već posjedujete. Drugo, nema formalnih istražnih radnji s ciljem utvrđivanja krivične odgovornosti i ciljem utvrđivanja gdje se nalaze djeca. I treći jeste da država prihvata odgovornost na način da isplati nematerijalnu, odnosno materijalnu štetu. To nije borba protiv kriminala, to nije borba za spoznavanje istine i upravo temeljem svega toga, nekad u martu, odnosno prije marta 24. godine, na ideju nekoliko ljudi iz udruženja, naravno profesora Paula, Alexisa, Elize, drugih ljudi koji su njima pružili podršku, smo napravili ovo istraživanje koje je profesor Paul i uvažena kolegica i kolega prezentovali. Naravno, ovo istraživanje treba da promijeni svijest, prije svega akademske, odnosno naučne zajednice, da omogući, motiviše i natjera druge akademske radnike da se bave i spoznajom ove međunarodne trgovine djecom. Naravno, moja intencija je bila i dan danas je da, iako bude dokazano da se radi o međunarodnoj trgovini djecom, sam mišljenja da bi se barem trebalo pokušati ići na novu inkriminaciju, na inkriminaciju koja će omogućiti provođenje, dakle, i međunarodnih istraga, a to je da ove zločine definiramo i kvalifikujemo kao zločine protiv čovječnosti. Zašto je to tako? Čak i međunarodne trgovine djecom ima rok zastare i neće omogućiti i dati pravni niti stvarni osnov za provođenje istrage. Ratni zločin, zločin protiv čovječnosti, genocid su zapravo krivična djela propisana međunarodnim humanitarnim pravom kroz Ženevske konvencije i nema zastare odnosno na nju. Analizirajući sve ovo čime se bavimo, samo je po mom skromnom mišljenju jedna pravna kvalifikacija ispravna, to je zločin protiv čovječnosti. Zašto? Zato što je to jedino krivično djelo koje dopušta da se napad od strane pojedinca ili sistema izvrši i u mirnodopskom vremenu. Ne samo, dakle, u okviru rata, oružanog sukoba. I drugi bitan element jeste da napad su isključivo civili. Bebe zapravo jesu civili. Na kraju ću zaključiti, dakle, sa jednim zaključkom čuvenog Williama Shakespearea, a to je da zapamtite zločin, iako nema jezik, govori čudesnim glasom. Vi ste zapravo interpretatori tih glasova i zaista svima nama želim da nastavimo naprijed. Hvala vam.
Znači, ovo je simbol, ovo nije papir, ovo je za istoriju, ovo je za ovi 4 ljudi, znači prvo je Sandi, da mu se zahvalimo. Ja znam da ih on ima mnogo, ali ove će sigurno ući u anale. Profesor Paul, i jedno pitanje. Pitanje glasi, gde je kraj?
The end is that we have a properly accountable global system that means that instances of stolen babies and adoption fraud are investigated and that parents always find out what happened to their offspring and the offspring always know their own origins.
Šta nam je rekao? Ajde. Gde je kraj na srpski?
Još nije kraj, ali bit će. Da, i mi radimo zajedno.
Znala 100.000 dece sa ove teritorije Titove Jugoslavije su nestale, otete i prodate. Aleksandar Kasvel ovo mora da završi.
Hvala vama. Hvala.
Ima jedno pojačanje, jedna mlada devojka, student, profesor, ja pitala kakav je bila student.
She was an excellent student. Top student. Yeah.
Top. Student top. Znači ti i on slušate njega i uz njega i ovo završavate. Mi ne možemo umreti dok vi ne završite. Jasno?
I am a Greek-born adoptee, adopted to the United States, and I found my biological family, including my biological mother, still alive almost 9 years ago in 2017. I founded the Epithia Project in 2019. Epithia is the Greek word that means happiness, and it's also my original name. And so we're the Happiness Project. We're a US-based nonprofit that helps free of charge Greek adoptees searching for their roots and Greek families searching for their children lost or presumably lost to adoption. We administer a number of programs through our organization, including Search and Reunion. We have a free DNA kit distribution program in partnership with MyHeritage. We do education for adoptees, families, and the general public, and advocacy and activism for the birth and identity rights of Greek adoptees. In fact, we worked for 5 very long years to have Greek citizenship restored to Greek-born adoptees. And just a year ago, after multiple meetings with all the ministries in Greece, the members of parliament, and other agencies, we and our legal team were finally overjoyed that they actually issued a ministerial order for the restoration of the citizenship to Greek adoptees, and so far about 50 of our adoptees have achieved their Greek citizenship and had it restored to them. So we're very proud of that. We will work closely with several international organizations, including Intercountry Adoptee Voices, and I also was the first Greek adoptee to ever testify at the UN in Geneva about my adoption and about the illegal adoptions in Greece. We also attended the First World Congress last year on enforced disappearances, which included stolen children and illicit and illegal adoptions. So far, our organization has facilitated the reconnections of 45 Greek adoptees with their biological families. So we're very proud of that. Just to give you a short history of Greek adoptions in general, Greek adoptees are one of the oldest cohorts of intercountry adoptees, and yet we're one of the least known. Our story is often lost in the narrative of the Vietnamese, the Korean, the Chinese, the Russian, and other children who came after us. Our story began in the dark Cold War decades of the 1950s and 60s, with thousands of Greek children were sent abroad for adoption, mainly to the United States, with about 600 who went to the Netherlands, so there's about 4,000 in total that we know of. These adoptions, while given the coding of legality by the Greek courts, were mired in scandal and greed and were at the very least irregular in nature, with many being illicit or illegal. Orphanage directors, lawyers, doctors, nurses, and even some priests were involved in sending these children abroad. And these adoptions were often finalized in as little as a few weeks to a few months, with little or no oversight by either the Greek or the American governments. There were many unscrupulous adoption brokers who counted their money while they dispatched these children off to other countries with minimal or no documentation and little hope of ever finding the way back to their homeland. There are hundreds of examples that we've found of the coercion of biological mothers, falsified and inconsistent documents, irregular court procedures, mothers tricked into signing documents that gave guardianship to orphanage directors so they could do what they liked with the children, and thousands of mothers told that their babies had died when in fact they'd been given for adoption. These children had no say in what happened to them. Adults in Greece, the United States, and other foreign nations decided what would happen to them, strip them of their families, their culture, and their heritage. And so now these children are all adults and they're looking for their families. Just to give you a little background, my name today is Linda Carol Trotter, but my original name was Efthihia Nula. I was born in a small mountain village called Stranoma in western Greece. My adoption from Greece to the United States, like many of the others during that period, was by proxy and illegal, encouraged by a climate in which there was virtually no oversight of these adoptions by either the Greek government or the United States government, and were proxy adoptions where the parents never appeared in court and the lawyer served as a proxy, were freely allowed. My adoption involved bribery. My biological mother was coerced into giving me up. My orphanage and adoption records are fraught with falsified documents, forged signatures, and inconsistencies, and the Greek lawyer deliberately lied to my adoptive parents and told them I was a premature baby and my mother died in childbirth. And I've seen many others with similar documents in their files. Well, I was, despite the indictments of individuals in both countries for baby trafficking or baby selling, nobody was ever sent to prison and nobody was ever held accountable in either country. Well, I was fortunate to be adopted by kind and loving parents. Many of my fellow adoptees were not so lucky. Large numbers of them suffered neglect and psychological, physical, and sexual abuse. and the scars from that trauma have never healed. And the lack of pre-adoption screening by the Greek government and the lack of post-adoption follow-up by the U.S. government were solely responsible for this travesty. Now to the subject we want to talk about, and hopefully it will help as FIND, this organization, comes to fruition. We want to talk about the DNA program that we have. In 2019, 2 years after I found my biological family, I then founded the Eftikia Project to help other Greek adoptees. And in 2020, by that time, we had large numbers of Greek biological families coming to us who were desperately searching for children they believed had been stolen and sold for adoption. They were told their seemingly healthy infants had died, often 3 days after they were born. And in many cases, there were no birth certificates, no death certificates. They were never given the body of the infant. When the parents would ask for the body, they would say, oh, we've already put it in asbesti, which is the Greek word for lime, or we have buried it in a mass grave, only to find that no such mass grave even existed. In some cases, they were given a sealed box and told, don't open it because some noxious fumes or infection might result. And so because parents trusted doctors and put them on a pedestal, they believed them. We also had adoptees who had been adopted in Greece coming to us who had very little documentation and had been stonewalled by institutions when they were asking for their records. We quickly realized that the only tool that these people likely had was DNA. But at the time, DNA wasn't really a thing in Greece, and Greeks were suspicious of it and its ramifications. In the summer of 2020, right after COVID, some of the restrictions had been lifted and we were able to travel to Greece again. We scraped money together and bought 12 DNA kits from just randomly from the 3 major companies, Ancestry, 23andMe, and MyHeritage. And at this point, those kits were probably anywhere from 80 to 100 euros at the time, a piece. Not like today when they have, we have a sale, it's $29, which would have been great back then. So I loaded up my car in Greece and took 12 kits with me and went on a circular trip around Greece to people who had expressed interest in getting DNA, either families who were looking for stolen babies or adoptees who were desperate to find out anything because they had no paperwork. So I went from Igoumenitsa to Corfu, Thessaloniki, Athens, Chalkida, and back to my home in Naftakos. I met people in coffee shops, in tavernas, at their homes, and even in my car at rest stops on the way to where we could find a central place to meet to get DNA samples. And we just prayed one of those 12 kits would come back with something, but the odds were astronomical because thousands of people do DNA every day. Well, we got the miracle. A month later, I was scrolling through the results and one of them said sister. And we had an adoptee who had searched for 30 years, had very little paperwork at all. It was impossible to find her family. And it wound up that she matched with her sister and her nephew because they had both done DNA just for the son for fun. He wanted to see how Greek he was. And the mother said, please let me do it too. Maybe it's the only way I find my baby sister. And so they also had another sister. So they had lived for 70 years, only 80 kilometers apart. One in Thessaloniki and one in Katerini. So DNA is a very powerful thing, especially when it comes to a situation like that. So shortly after that amazing trek across Greece, the MyHeritage company read an article in the Greek Reporter about our efforts and how we would get in the car and just travel and meet people to do these DNA tests, and they offered to help us. So we formed a formal partnership in which they would provide free DNA kits and other support, including a subscription to their services and expert help from genealogists to help us do that. So suddenly our days of trying to scrape money together and get DNA kits was over, which was great. And the partnership continues to this day. Whenever we need DNA kits, we just call them up and they help us. So they've been very wonderful. So if you're lucky enough as an adoptee or perhaps a stolen baby to have any kind of documents that are true and accurate, that contain true information about the biological family. It's possible to find people without DNA. However, we adhere to the old saying that we're very fond of, that DNA doesn't lie, people do. And they lie for many reasons: to protect the biological mother, to protect the adoptee, and I'd say protection loosely, to protect the family honor. Adoptive parents lie often about the circumstances of a baby's birth, maybe to protect themselves, but also to make themselves and their child feel better about adoption. So we've heard many of the same stories over again. Oh, your mother was a college student, fell in love with her professor, and that's how you came about. Or I've heard the car accident story more times than I can count, where, oh, your whole family was in this horrible car accident, and you were the only one left alive, and they took you to the orphanage. Or, like in my case, your mother died in childbirth, but my parents were told that by the lawyer. So sometimes the adoptive parents will tell stories that they have heard from the lawyer, which are also lies. So there's a lot of reasons that they do this. And biological mothers have often lied about who the actual biological father is, because perhaps they have harbored some guilt or shame about who they had the baby with. So DNA is 99.99% accurate. It doesn't lie. But even if we have all the documents that lead us to a biological family, and neither the family nor the adoptee have any doubt, well, this is my family, we kind of use the whole, I like to say the old saying that President Ronald Reagan used to say a lot about the nuclear arms race: trust but verify. So we always confirm relatives with a DNA test, even when there's great documents and you pretty much have no doubt. Because once we found a biological family, we always ask a family member to do a test. And so far, nobody's refused to do that. Some of them don't see the need for it. Oh, we know he's our son, we don't have a problem. But it's just safe to do that, because out of 100 cases, you might have one that has false documents, and what if that's not the right family? So you want to make sure that you put them together. Now, the biggest help for DNA is when you have what they call a foundling, a child who's been left at an orphanage or left somewhere with no identifying documents, and this would be the same case with a stolen child, and that makes it a difficult case. And DNA is basically probably the only tool you have to prove that that's your biological family. And the success of that, though, depends on somebody on the other end that's a close match doing DNA, and that will, a close enough match that will connect you with that family. And sometimes these cases can stretch on for years, as was one of the cases of one of our board members. He had been searching for 12 years and had done every DNA test in the book except one. I convinced him to do that test, and he got what they call a first cousin once removed, a child of a first cousin. Well, that guy talked to him for a while and then stopped talking to him. And but during that period, he got a second cousin who they were both from the same village in Greece. And Panayota and I, having that clue, knowing that the family came from that village, we were able to go there and find the family and reconnect them. But we also used DNA to prove it, because we got more DNA from his living first cousins, and then from all of that we were able to determine who his biological father was. So, you know, DNA is a great tool, but it does require the goodwill of the other person on the other end to actually communicate with you.
Yes. Jako je važno ovo što je ova žena rekla, a ja ću pokušati zbog ovih majki da samo par rečenica kažem, da je zaustavim. Prvo što je ona danas rekla, to je da traži grčko državljanstvo. Znači, prodata je u Ameriku, ukradena je uzeta je kao dete i traži grčko državljanstvo. Tu je pala u vodu ona teorija zavere: nemojte tražiti decu, ta vas deca neće, ta deca imaju novi život i oni za vas neće da čuju. Znači, ona je svojim izlaganjem sada to porušila i objasnila koliko grčevito se deca bore da saznaju čija su, odakle su i da im se vrati svoj prvobitni identitet. To je prvo. Drugo, njena priča i naša priča se jako razlikuju. Zbog toga što je njena mama primorana da nju da, to jest da je se odrekne, ona je automatski dobila status siročeta i prošla je kroz proces nelegalnog usvojenja. Naša deca nisu išla tim putem. Naša deca su poturena kao kukavičje jaje drugoj porodici koja je upisana kao biološka. To znači, sada, gospođa je stigla iz Belgije, sada, sutra ide kući, nosi dete na kome piše da je ona rodila. To dete neće tražiti DNK. To dete neće biti uključeno u borbu za pronalaženje svoga biološkog porekla. Tu nam je priča o DNK potpuno uništena. To dete se može probuditi jedinom jačanjem ovakvih organizacija, pokreta, konferencija i tako dalje, gde će neko na bazi svoje sumnje, mi imamo toga mnogo, čekaj, stani, zašto ja nisam mogao dati transfuziju svojoj mami i tako dalje. Znači, onda se ustanovi da on tu ne pripada. To je zaključak, ali do toga zaključka treba doći sa znanjem da negde tamo neke žene traže neku decu. Pa će možda crv u nečoj glavi da proradi. Ovo je naš put daleko teži. Vi ste prošli nelegalno usvajanje i krivotvorenu dokumentaciju. Naša deca nisu prošla usvajanje, naša deca su prodata. Mi imamo ovo što je profesor Paul pričao i Aleksandar 1972. u Palermu na konferenciji međunarodnom. Profesor doktor Ivo Nedeljković je rekao da advokati u Beogradu prodaju decu. Kad se dete proda i upiše na druge ljude kao da su roditelji, više nema šanse za ovim. Ovo je jako težak postupak. Da kažem, ja sam juče donela 4, 2 sam dala, Dragica i Milka su tu, uzeće ovo. Naše majke stotine su radile DNK. Nijedan nismo dobili džabe, svaki smo lično kupili. Znači, moramo naći načina da aktiviramo ili da informacija dođe bukvalno do svake kuće na planeti, do svake porodice i da izazove neku sumnju. Onog momenta kad se lavina pokrene, to će posle ići. Za sada smo u fazi nelegalnog usvojenja kojeg i mi imamo, ali nije prioritetno. Njega imamo manje. Žene koje su naterane da daju decu su naterane. Mi nismo naterane. Mi ne znamo gde su nam. Mene su rasporili, onu su rasporili, izvadili decu i odneli. Nama niko nije rekao potpiši, odrekni se. Mi se nismo odrekli. Znači, kukaviće jaja, ako znate šta je kukavica, kukavica je ptica koja leže jaja u tuđe gnjezdo. Eto, toliko samo da se zahvalim Lindi i da kažem, mnogo nam je pomoglo to što je rekla. Ona je našla svoje biološke roditelje u Grčkoj, ona je Grkinja, ona želi da ima grčko državljanstvo, ona se kroz to bori. Ovo sam morala malo zbog ovih roditelja koji su ovde.
I'm not suggesting that an illegal adoption and a stolen child are the same. However, DNA is a tool, and it's the one hope a lot of people have that if a family's looking and they do DNA, then you hope at some point someone that you need to do that test, either the child that's stolen, their children or their grandchildren do this test, and then you can find them. Yes, you can't, if you don't know where the child is, you can't get them to do a DNA test. And we have plenty of stolen children in Greece with the same exact story as stolen children in Serbia. And we give DNA tests to those families because they're hoping that their lost child or one of their relatives is going to do DNA so they can find this person. So there's always hope, and that's the one thing. Hope is always the last thing to die. And yes, you can't do but you can still have. I thought I was here to talk about DNA and how it does help people, and it can help in this case. But you have to, of course, it's not the same.
Ako nam ostane vremena popodne, onda ćemo u razgovoru i u savjetima to odraditi. I prevremene bebe idu na tržište. Drugo što je važno, dok ja ovo govorim, molila bi Danijelu iz Nemačke, koja zna rumunski, samo jednu reč da pitam ovu majku. Dođi, Danijela, dok ja govorim. Kaže, komunistička Rumunija je zabranjivala da se nedonoščad nose kući. Rekla žena u filmu. Znači, država zabranjuje da to dete ide kući. Dete ide u sirotište, a majka ide kući. To dete iz sirotišta otišlo je za Francusku. Želim... Danijela, ona u filmu spominje, oni su me pratili, oni su znali gde sam ja, oni su istraživali mene, pita je ko su to bili oni.
Jurista od fabrike je dolazio kod njih kući.
Ko je dolazio?
Advokat ili pravnik, kako se izradi.
Advokat.
Pravnik.
Advokati su centar prodaje dece. Znači ponovo advokat koji je bdio nad njom.
Bila u Krulovsku. Gdje ona radila, pravnik iz firme gdje ona radila.
Njoj su rekli da je dete u Francuskoj umrlo. A detetu su rekli u Francuskoj da je majka u Rumuniji umrla. To je reklo sirotište. Znači, dete iz Francuske zove sirotište, sirotište kaže nemojte više zvati, vaša mama je umrla. Znači, obe su umrle. Toliko o smrti. Ovo je nama jako važno u našim istragama, da nijednom dokumentu države ne treba verovati, ali i naglasiti da su štek za bebe bila sirotišta. Da su sirotišta bila pijace za prodaju dece. To smo iz ovog slučaja još jednom potvrdili. Idemo dalje. Ajde, Željko.
Jednu priču žrtve. Mihael Endrel je beba iz Kolumbije koja je usvojena u Švedskoj. Dakle, ovdje je riječ o još jednom ukradenom identitetu i priča o tome kako i one zemlje Evrope koje se smatraju uređenim društvima mogu da postanu dio lanca sumnjivih usvojenja.
Poštovane dame i gospodo.
Bravo!
Želio bih da započnem svoje obraćanje tako što se vam se najprije zahvatili na pozivu na učestvujem na ovom kongresu. Tema oko koje danas govorimo isustno je važna i duboko pogađa mnoge biološke roditelje, ali i djeca koja su data na usvajanje. Nažalost, mnoga djeca su u prošlosti nezakonito oduzimana svojim majkama i potom davana na usvajanje. U svom izlaganju govorit ću o ulozi Švedske, ali o svojoj ličnoj priči i protokol koji me je doveo do toga da pronađem svoju majku. dolazim iz Kolumbije i zato su svoje izlaganje nazvaliti na španskom jeziku.
Bravo.
Ni siquiera una autoridad en Suecia pudo ayudarme a encontrar mi madre biológica. Eso dice mucho sobre la autoridad sueca encargada de supervisar a Adoptionscentrum, organización que hace muchos años me llevó ilegalmente a Suecia, la autoridad MFUF. Me llamo Mikael Kjellrosendrell y fui adoptado a Suecia el 9 de agosto del año 1985. Después de 40 años, supe por mi madre biológica que fui secuestrado cuando aún estaba en mi incubadora en el hospital donde nací, para luego ser canalizado a través de un sistema de adopción ilegal y corrupto desde Colombia hacia Suecia.
Čak ni državni organi u Švedskoj nisu mogli da mi pomognu da pronađem svoju biološku majku. To dovoljno govori o švedskoj instituciji odgovornoj za nadzor Centra za usvajanje, Adoptionscentrum, koji mi je nekada davno ilegalno doveo u Švedsku. Reč je o MFOF-u, odnosno organu za porodično pravo i podršku roditeljstvu. Moje ime je Mikael Kjellrosendrell, usvojen sam u Švedsku 9. augusta 1984. godine i nakon 40 godina od svoje biološke majke saznao sam da sam otet iz inkubatora u bolnici u kojoj sam rođen kako bih bio sproveden kroz ilegalan i korumpiran sistem usvajanja iz Kolumbije u Švedsku.
Hasta el día de hoy sigue siendo surrealista haber encontrado por fin a mi madre. A veces pienso, ¿cómo puede ser posible? ¿Cómo pudo salirme todo tan bien a mí, mientras que otros todavía siguen buscando? Cuando tenía 9 años, supe que había sido dado una adopción a Suecia y que tenía una madre en Colombia llamada Diana Muñoz. Según los documentos, ella tenía 32 años y de acuerdo con la información me había dado en adopción porque no tenía dinero.
I da imam majku u Kolumbiji koja se zove Diana Muñoz. Prema dokumentima ona je tada imala 32 godine i navodno me je dala na usvajanje jer nije imala novca.
Muchas personas en mi alrededor tenían un gran deseo de ayudarme, pero no sabían cómo ni por dónde empezar a buscar. Durante casi 20 años busqué a sistemas colombianos en páginas amarillas en distintos países y elaboré un plan para encontrar a mi madre. Muchos días fueron difíciles, muchos otros muy tristes, por no tener a mi mamá a mi lado. En Suecia se ha dado la impresión que ser adoptado es algo muy positivo y que uno obtiene una vida mejor que la que habría tenido en su país de origen. Piensa que te libraste de ir al bucerero a buscar comida. Me dijeron muchas veces mis padres adoptivos sin saber realmente lo que había ocurrido. Mis padres adoptivos confiaron ciegamente en mis documentos. Esto es simple y llanamente trata de niños.
U Švedskoj su ljudi stvorili sliku da je usvajanje nešto predivno i da ste dobili bolji život nego što biste ga imali u zemlji porekla. Govorili su mi, zamisli da nisi morao da tražiš hranu na deponiji. I to često moji usvojitelji, ne znajući šta se zapravo dogodilo. Moji usvojitelji su slepo verovali dokumentima, ali ovo je prosto i jednostavno trgovina djecom.
No fue hasta que nació mi propia hija que comencé a trabajar intensamente en mi caso, Me puse en contacto con una mujer en Colombia que tenía acceso al hospital, antiguas bases y datos para obtener información. Logré averiguar que mi madre podría llamarse Diana P. Muñoz, pero ¿qué significaba la P? Luego comenzamos a trabajar con Facebook, que resultó ser una verdadera jungla para buscar. Enviamos mensajes a 40 mujeres con el mismo nombre y a algunas con las mismas combinaciones de nombres, pero en ese momento no obtuvimos respuesta. Cuando no recibimos respuesta, continuamos buscando en bases de datos colombianas, hasta que conocí a un detective y la policía en Colombia. Él asumió mi caso y durante 2 semanas viajaron por Colombia buscando más información en los servicios sociales, ICBF, la agencia tributaria, notarias públicas, entre otros lugares. Regresé a Suecia sin nuevos datos, pero de alguna manera sabía que mi madre sabía que yo la estaba buscando. En Colombia llegué a maldecir varias veces para la frustración de no encontrar nada en el país. Sentando en la mesa de la cocina de mi casa, recibí un mensaje de texto por la noche. Hola, chico, ¿qué es lo que intentas escribirme? Era un mensaje de Diana Patricia Muñoz. Después de algunos mensajes empezamos a hablar por teléfono, una llamada que cambió mi vida por completo. Había encontrado a mi madre biológica. Un mes más tarde pude confirmar negro sobre blanco mediante una prueba de ADN que ella era mi madre biológica. La alegría y el alivio fueron enormes. Quedaron todas las preguntas. ¿Quién me hizo esto? ¿Por qué me dejaron quedarme con mi mamá? ¿Por qué precisamente yo? Y mucha más. Hoy lucho junto con un amigo de la voz por el derecho de las madres y saber quiénes son sus hijos. También soy miembro de forma parte de la Junta Directiva de la Red Global de Adopción. Adoptados para poder influir a nivel nacional y lograr un cambio. Mis últimas palabras son aquí. No se rindan, aunque tome tiempo, sigan luchando. Yo junto con muchos otros estamos aquí para ayudarlas, a ustedes, madres que extrañan a sus hijos. Ahora es el momento de luchar para poner fin de la actividad de adopción en Suecia, algo que incluso señala una investigación nacional. Luchemos juntos para la justicia. Muchas gracias por permitirme estar aquí.
Moje posljednje riječi su ne odustajte. Pustite da vreme teče, ali nastavite da se borite. Ja sam zajedno sa mnogim drugima ovdje da pomognem vama, majkama kojima nedostaju njihova djeca. Sada je vreme za borbu u cilju zatvaranja sistema usvajanja u Švedskoj, na šta nas je istraga na nacionalnom nivou već uputila. Borimo se zajedno za pravdu i veliko vam hvala što ste mi omogućili da dođemo ovdje.
Dame i gospodo, moje poštovanje. Ja sam penzioner iz Beograda, živim u jednom podavalskom selu. Najlepši deo života proveo sam radeći na poslovima i zadacima borbe protiv krijumčarenja narkotika. Odnosno, tada se to zvalo borba protiv narkomanije i krijumčarenja. Tačnije, obrađivao sam one za koje smo sumnjali da su pripadnici albanske mafije. Ako sam živ i ovde među vama danas, onda to znači da sam na vreme naučio pravila i primjenjivao ih. Prvo pravilo koje sam naučio glasi, ovo niste čuli, čućete sada. Koga god nađete sa robom, čiji je promet zabranjen, on je samo diler, bez obzira na kom nivou on bio, da li je to predsjednik opštine, da li je to predsjednik države ili je to ulični prodavac. On je samo diler, što znači Mi smo do sada otkrili samo dilere, a to su doktori, medicinske sestre, babice, akušeri, ne znam, ginekolozi i advokati i ostala fukara koja je bila spremna za pare da proda dušu i da decu nazove robom. Oni su decu nazivali tim imenom zato što su ih prodavali. Ako hoćemo da postignemo cilj koji se zove da znamo gde je roba završila, istragu okrećemo u tom pravcu i postavljamo pitanje gde se prodaje roba i kome je namenjena bila. Ali s obzirom da sam ja danas čuo i pročitao iz ovoga dok sam se pripremao, da cilj i namera ove organizacije koju najhrabrije na svetu može da vodi samo Ana, je da se onemogući u buduće ovakvo ili slično dešavanje. Onda istragu ne vodimo od dilera prema robi, već istragu vodimo od dilera prema nalogodavcu ili idejnom tvorcu. Ako do toga ne dođemo, mi ćemo prekinuti samo lanac kojim se roba prodaje, to je jedan kanal, sutra će oni promeniti, sve će njihove operativce prebaciti, malo levo i malo desno, sve će se nastaviti, nećemo uspeti da prekinemo. Ako hoćemo da prekinemo, znači moramo da idemo prema nalogodavcima. Ko su najčešće nalogodavci? Kada kažemo država je kriva, ja cenim, to je hrabra od pojedinca kada kaže. Kada pojedinac kaže to je služba kriva. I tu se slažem da je hrabro, ali sa mog aspekta i sa mojim iskustvom ja to ne bih koristio. To je termin, odnosno definicija koja meni ne može ništa da pomogne. Zašto? Zato što niko neće od pojedinaca koji su u tom trenutku predstavljali državu da kaže ja sam u ime države naredio da se carina otvori za to dete koje je ukradeno, pretpostavimo, u Sremskoj Mitrovici i prebačeno preko granice. To su znači savezni organi i da vidimo ko je u trenutku kada je neko dete ukradeno u Sremskoj Mitrovici ili bilo gde drugo bio na vlasti u našoj državi i kada kažem u buduće, potrudit ću se da budem kratak, ali da budem jasan, da me razumete. Kad god kažem službe obaveštajno-bezbedonosnog karaktera, ne mislim samo na naše službe u Srbiji. I one službe koje su decu, odnosno države, koje su decu prihvatale i tamo im pravili papire na neki način i oni su bili deo iste priče, sve je to bila koordinirana akcija. I moj predlog je bio i na prošlom izlaganju i sada, da ako hoćemo da prekinemo ovo i da ovo bude istorijsko zasedanje, moramo da konstatujemo da mora neko od nas da se žrtvuje unapred i da kaže dajte da dođemo do imena koje dana tog i tog na tom i tom mestu, kada je dete nestalo, bio na čelo obaveštajne, na čelo bezbedonosne službe u gradu, odnosno državi iz koje dete odlazi. I ko je bio po vertikali u gradu, odnosno državi u kojoj je dete otišlo. Kada njih prozovemo, znam ja i te ljude koje mogu da pretpostavim, znači nisu oni tako tvrd materijal kao što se predstavljaju. Kriju se oni iza država i kriju se iza funkcija. Kad odu u penziju najčešće umiru u strahu od onoga što su radili, crkavajući poluslinavi, izvinite na izrazu, iza svojih kuća. Moramo imenom i prezimenom, ne da ih optužimo, da im damo mogućnost da nas tuže, nego ćemo reći, kada je dete nestalo tu i tu, na čelo obaveštajnih službi bio je taj i taj. Objasnite nam, ako ste bili pripadnik službe u državi, čije su bezbedonosne službe bile proglašavane za najbolje, čak jedna od 3 najbolje u svetu, kako je moguće da znate i otkrijete ptice koje su ukradene u Vojvodini, pa zaustavite i nađete ih na graničnom prelazu i vratite ih. Insekte, komarce ili kuniće, neke male tamo životinje. Kako je moguće da ste sve saznali, jedino ne znate gde su deca? Dame i gospodo, to se zove kukavičluk, to se zove fukarluk, a strah čoveku često obraz kalja, reče jedan naš velikan mnogo pre mene. Ja to ponavljam i upozoravam vas. Znanje bez hrabrosti u ovoj borbi ne znači ništa. Mnogi znaju i imaju podatke one koje ima Ana, koje ima Žana, ali nisu imali ljudske hrabrosti. Meni je kukavice žao. Ljudi umiru, kukavice završavaju svoj život na način kojim se opisuje prestanak života životinje, to je crkavanje, jer crkavaju samo oni koji nemaju razum, odnosno koji se prema ljudima ponašaju tako kako se neko drugi ponaša. Što znači? Do sad smo otkrili samo dilere, za ovu nameru koju Ana ima, malo je to, nemoj mi Ana zameriti, molim te. Malo je, moramo žešće i moramo direktnije. Ne možemo mi čoveku za koga unapred znamo da nema obraza, da mu kažemo sram te bilo. Pa on zna, on se neće zastidjeti toga. On poštuje samo strah i tvrdo ime i prezime kad mu kažeš ti si bio na čelu tih službi, kaži kako je moguće. Imaš pravo da kažeš nisam znao, ali onda objasni onom drugom delu države zašto si ih tad lagao da si kontrolisao celu teritoriju. Zašto si lagao? Ako nisi lagao, onda si znao da nam decu kradu. To je mat pozicija za njih. Dame i gospodo, to je prvo pravilo koje sam naučio i primenjivao ga. Ja sam jedini, sada ću uraditi ono što istorija ne pamti na ovakvim skupovima. Jedan od 9 braća, Musa Mehmeti, je bio jedan od vrhunskih dilera heroina na prostoru Kosova i Metohije. Decenijama niko nije mogao da mu priđe. Lišio sam ga slobode, kada sam ga pitao šta želi da mu pružim kao uslugu te večeri, tražio je da ga odvežem, da mi pruži ruku, jer sam to uradio na pravi, pošteni i muški način nego što je on. Tražio je da ga odvežem, da mi pruži ruku. Što znači, onima koji znaju posao, treba omogućiti da rade. Da vidimo samo kako se službe brane. Pa tako što po odlasku, rekoh, u penziju njih nema nigde. A dok su ovako na funkciji, dok imaju nekakvu zaštitu i ono što im je država dala, oni su komandanti parade i oni su najhrabriji. Evo ja kao penzioner, koji juče sam kosio nešto iza kuće onom mašinicom malo, ništa ne radim, nemam nikakvu zaštitu, idem svugde sam, neka dođu sa mnom, neka izaberu emisiju, neka izaberu televiziju, da im dokažem, ili su varali tada narod kad su govorili da su odlični, ili varaju sad kad kažu da ne znaju gde su, da bi ih doveli do te situacije, da bi oni priznali da su znali da su deca kradena, moramo da pritisnemo dilere, a to su doktori. Nemojte doktore da gledamo mi na nekom visokom nivou. Titula je jedno, a karakter i moral su drugo. Doktor mora da nam prizna ko je njega štitio i ko je deci pravio papire, pravila država, naredio neko iz Ministarstva unutrašnjih poslova, tada savezne države, odnosno SFRJ u kojoj sam ja radio. Moramo da budemo direktni i molim vas, samo da prihvatimo. Ako nismo hrabri, makar onoliko, koliko su bili hrabri oni koji su nam krali decu, jer oni se nisu plašili da nam kradu decu, a mi se plašimo da im kažemo imena i prezimena. Dođite, imate institucije. Dajte meni, ja ću da pročitam. Vi nađite, ja nemam ni mogućnosti, ni zdravstvenih nekih problema imam. Ne mogu da dođem do tih imena na tako bezazlen način kako bi trebalo da se dolazi. Ja ću da ih pročitam, nikakav problem nije. Ja ću da im kažem da su to bile kukavice. Neko pomenu ratne zločine, pa nijedan hrabar vojnik nije pravio ratne zločine. To pravi samo fukara. To samo prave bednici koji sa predumišljajem idu u rat, ne bi li nešto uradili. Da vidimo samo još. Pomenuo je, mislim, gospodin Dizdarević. I on mi je oduzeo pravo, ali nisam ljut na njega, nije to uradio zlonamerno i nije znao šta ja spremam. On je pomenuo jednu skoro pa najvažniju stvar danas. Ja ću možda uraditi ono što vi niste spremni u ovom trenutku. Ja ću reći, ili je neko moju državu prevario pa je ona ponudila po 10.000 za bebu, ili je država na taj način priznala da je umešana. Samo su te dve varijante, nema treća. Nema treća. Zašto? Zato što moje životno iskustvo kaže, ja nikada u životu nisam doživeo da neko ko nije umešan u krivično delo za koje je optužen, meni ponudi neku nagodbu. Ovde je država ponudila nagodbu. Da ne ulazimo u to sada šta je država htela s tim. Ali, kada bi meni neko poverio da vodim ovu istragu, ja bih krenuo, to bi bila nulta tačka. pozovemo one stručnjake iz Skupštine da vidim s kojim podacima oni raspolažu i po kom osnovu oni dovode Srbiju, ugrožavaju celu jednu državu svojim nekim odlukama da daju 10.000. Nećemo da kažemo i nećemo da im zamerimo to. Sa cifrom od 10.000 oni su pokazali koliko su veliki. Jer ako je jedan lipicaner košta 500.000 konj za trke, ako jedan lipicaner košta 1.000.000 evra, oni su odredili koliko vrede naša deca. Ne, oni koji su odredili cifru od 10.000 i to usvojili, oni su direktno priznali da ili znaju za krivično delo ili je neko podmetnuo to. To moramo na taj način da gledamo. Istraga počinje od tada. Ja se ne slažem sa mnom kad ona kaže sram ih bilo, ponudili 10.000. Ne, odlično su uradili. Svaki čovjek pre ili kasnije napravi grešku, oni su je tad napravili. Za ovo što sam ja rekao i za sve što pričam samo u svoje ime i ničiju zaštitu ne tražim, ničije podatke ne koristim. Da vidimo samo još idejni tvorci. A ko su to idejni tvorci? Kako da dođemo do idejnih tvoraca? Pa tako što ćemo dilere dovesti u situaciju da nam kažu ko su nalogodavci. Kada dođemo do nalogodavaca, oni će reći ko su idejni tvorci. A idejni tvorci u stvari su oni koji pružaju ključnu zaštitu doktorima i ostalima koji su umešani u to krivično delo. I tu nema velike filozofije. Tu samo treba nasložiti sve, poslušati neke koji imaju iskustva u tim poslovima koji se zovu sprečavanje trgovine zabranjenom robom. U ovom slučaju oni nazvaše našu decu roba. I na kraju da vam kažem koliko je važno da čovjek čisto radi svoj posao. Mnogo u svim državama sveta, mnogo ljudi radi u ministarstvima unutrašnjih poslova. I najveća tragedija je što običan narod na njih gleda kao na policajce. Evo ovdje imamo neke, koliko sam čuo, i aktivne u službi. Neka oni kažu da li ja grešim. Ne, to su zaposleni u ministarstvu. Oni koji su pravi policajci, to su ljudi koji su spremni da se bore protiv svih vrsta kriminala u svakom trenutku, na svakom mestu, bez obzira na posljedice. Kada im postavite ta 4 uslova, od ovih koji su zaposleni primaju platu po ministarstvima unutrašnjih poslova po celom svijetu, a ne samo kod nas, vidjet ćete da je od mnogih veći i pošteniji policajac, čistačica ili kuvarica. Tako da to definišemo, da ne gledamo na službe koje su najveći jad i bedu naneli ne samo mom narodu, nego svim narodima, jer smo u njih gledali kao nešto vanzemaljsko. To su obični mali ljudi i provere su bile onako žestoke za prijem u te službe, da slučajno neko sa karakterom ne uđe u te službe. Kogod je ušao sa karakterom, završio je sa metkom ili u zatvoru. Što znači, nemojte da se plašite od njih. Budite iskreni i pravi borci na tom putu. Koliko je važno biti iskren policajac, moramo da se ugledamo na Englesku. Oni su izmislili lik agenta 007 i ceo svijet je te filmove u milionima slučajeva i, ne znam, gradova gledalo. Da se podigne svest ljudi koliko je važno kada je neki policajac dobar, je li tako? Ako je to tako, ja vama kažem, mi smo od Boga privilegovaniji nego Englezi. Englezi su morali da izmisle lik, mi smo dobili lika. Ana Pejić je pokazala veću hrabrost od svih nas. Nemojte da mi zamerite na tome, ja pristajem da je to tako. Zato sam ja, kao predsjednik udruženja pravih boraca, kojima je bio osnovni zadatak da zaštite nejač bez obzira na naciju, odlučio sam mojim saradnicima da sa brojem 007 uručim našoj Ani jednu značku, pa onda jednu legitimaciju. Evo, ona je odpad neko ko se moći da priđe vama i ovdje ima za civilno delo jednu malu značicu. Neka znamo da smo svi mi koji smo bili navodno hrabri i jaki samo deo onoga što Ana jeste. kad bi imao tvoju hrabrost. Iako su me neki odlikovali, ali nisam ti ni za mali prst.
Ljudi! Izašli smo, nisam prošla, a evo ga, imunitet. Znate kako oni rade, ovako. Ajmo.
Ana, mnogi policajci su zaposleni i plaćali autobusku kartu od posla do kuće i obrnuto. To im je jedino pokazivanje legitimacije. Tamo gdje se rade ozbiljni policijski poslovi, legitimacija nije potrebna.
Ti si naš stup, naš učitelj, naša snaga. Njegova reč vredi zlata, on nas uči. Straha ovde nema, ne kod mene, nego ni kod ovih majki, ni kod oni. Mi se dobro znamo, 24 godine majke Srbije tragaju za svojom decom. Od 2002. godine. 24 godine. Kad smo krenuli, bili smo lude babe. A vidi sad, vidi. Hvala vam.
In one person you have an expert and the victim. That's very rare. Please don't underestimate fathers. Milan knows, I know, fathers suffer as mothers. Because child is half-half. Sorry.
Iskreno saučešće, on je skupio snage da dođe. Zbog nje, zbog nas, stalno je sa nama. Nemojte suzama zamjeriti. Profesore, a da pustimo mi...
No. Yes. Have you got it? Have you got on YouTube? Yes.
Ajde, tamo i red. Ima. Izvoli, profesore, priđi ovoj deci i pokaži im. Profesor je inače muzičar, snimio je pesmu za tu mladu ženu davnih dana koja je bila...
In last 2 months, we talked a lot about this, and Natasha asked me to continue. So that is exactly what I'm doing now. Experts are people. Experts are people with soul. As an editor-in-chief, I face plagiarism. But my feeling is that this problem will diminish because of the softwares, which are very powerful. And now it's very difficult to plagiarize when you write an article, because it's easily detected. But with artificial intelligence is different, because artificial intelligence can fabricate investigation. Artificial intelligence can fabricate patients. It can fabricate death of a child. That is very dangerous. So that is another side of the story with artificial intelligence. It helps us, but on the other hand, it can be a disaster, a criminal. So medical fabrication is a prerequisite for newborn abduction. Everything starts from a white coat. The newborn abduction is impossible without a doctor and without a nurse. They start everything. I call them four horsemen of the apocalypse in a criminal maternity ward. Criminal maternity ward is a hospital department where children are abducted. It's not a hospital. It's a criminal ward. So obstetrician, neonatologist, pathologist, and midwife. All of them or some of them. They start. What are the fabricated medical documents needed for the abduction? They are necessary, prerequisite. It's birth history, it's newborn patient history, death certificate, and autopsy findings. All of them can be fabricated, totally or partly. So these fabrications are made by top experts. You have to be a top expert to do this. But these are people without soul. I have studied about 100 cases of abduction in Serbia, where in details. I was interested in the medical side of the problem, not the criminal side, but the medical side. What they do, what diagnoses they make to enable the abduction. And I have noticed that there are about 6 diagnoses that are repeating, constantly repeating the same diagnosis. What is common from all of them? They are very rare. They are very rare. So the figures are in promils per thousand, very rare. But they very often appear in these fabricated documents. Intracranial hemorrhage or stroke of a newborn is rare. It is not often. It is very rare. Then heart defect, also very rare. Acute respiratory distress syndrome, also. Meconium aspiration. Meconium is a stool of a newborn. Meconium aspiration syndrome. It is very rare that the newborn makes a stool inside the mother. They usually do that when they go out. Then nuchal cord. It's the cord wrapped around the neck. It's very rare. If it is wrapped, then it is only partly wrapped. It does not impair the health of a child. And then neonatal sepsis. Sepsis, it is also intoxication with, or the actually infection with very dangerous microorganisms. It is also very rare in maternity wards. But I have noticed that these diagnoses are constantly repeating. So they are very rare and they are lethal. there is no discussion that they kill. So when the mother is told that her child has a heart defect or nuchal cord or neonatal sepsis, she's afraid. She knows that is something that is disastrous. There is no help for her child. She does not suspect. She believes to the doctor, who is a criminal. That is awful. That is awful. This is the last slide. The figures, the statistics is very important. Stillbirth is rare. So it can be accepted that about 1 to 2 babies die per 1,000 births. 1 to 2. But if you have in one maternity ward that 10, 20, 30 children die per 1,000, that should be the ignition for the investigation. You have to give the answer how that is possible to have 10 or more children in one maternity ward to die at birth, to have a stillbirth. So statistics is very powerful. You can follow all the maternity wards. You can compare countries. You have a time series through the period. You have in Yugoslavia, for example, after the Second World War, there were about 80 stillbirths per 1,000. That is worse than in the poorest country in Africa. 80. That was fabricated. That was impossible. 80 is impossible. So the children were stolen. And then you can follow time series. You can compare the maternity wards. You see in one maternity ward in 1 year there is a rate of stillbirth is 10 and then drops to 1, and then again 20 and then drops to 3. That is something very, very suspicious, very suspicious, those big drops, and especially for the country. If you have, for example, in Serbia, I think now the rate of stillbirths is about 7 per 1,000. If you want to improve it to 6 per 1,000, that is very difficult, very, very difficult. To improve it from 7 to 6. And if you have those variations, big variations, that is very suspicious. And you have that problem in Yugoslavia and in Serbia. So statistics is very, very important. Statistics of stillbirths, very important. I'm sorry for this emotional disaster, but experts are people with soul. Thank you.